The grand palace of Eldoria stood silent in the early morning hours, its golden spires catching the first rays of dawn. Inside the Royal Medical Wing, Captain Marcus Aldrich lay motionless on a bed that had been hastily prepared for him. The 28-year-old soldier had served the crown faithfully for 8 years, but now his body was failing him. A piece of shrapnel from the recent border conflict had lodged near his heart, and despite the best efforts of the royal physicians, there was nothing more they could do. Marcus had always been different from the other soldiers. While most came from noble families seeking glory and titles, he had risen through the ranks purely through merit and dedication. Born in the poorest district of the capital, he had joined the Royal Guard at 18 with nothing but determination and a fierce loyalty to his country. His fellow soldiers respected him not for his birthright, but for his courage and the way he treated everyone with equal dignity, regardless of their station in life. The palace corridors buzzed with whispered conversations about the dying soldier. Servants who had worked in the castle for decades couldn't remember a time when a common-born guard had been brought to the Royal Medical Wing. Typically, injured soldiers were treated in the military barracks or sent to the city hospital, but King Edmund himself had ordered that Marcus be given the finest care available. Though everyone knew it was too late, Dr. Helena Whitmore, the chief royal physician, checked Marcus's vital signs with growing concern. His breathing had become labored during the night, and his pulse was weakening by the hour. She had seen enough dying soldiers to know that Marcus had perhaps a day left, maybe less. What troubled her most was not just his condition, but the strange request he had made when he first arrived at the palace 3 days earlier. Marcus had asked to speak with every single person who worked in the palace, from the highest-ranking nobles to the newest kitchen servant. At first, Dr. Whitmore had dismissed this as the rambling of a man in pain, possibly affected by the medications they were giving him. But Marcus had been completely lucid, his eyes clear and determined when he made the request. He had even provided a list he had somehow compiled of every person employed within the palace walls. The request had caused quite a stir among the palace staff. Many were curious about what a dying soldier could possibly want with them. Others were skeptical, wondering if this was some kind of investigation or if Marcus was planning to reveal secrets he had learned during his service. The royal guards who knew him well assured everyone that Marcus was trustworthy, but the mystery remained. King Edmund had been informed of the unusual request and, after some consideration, had granted permission. The king had always held Marcus in high regard. Remembering how the young soldier had once saved his life during an assassination attempt 2 years earlier, Marcus had thrown himself between the king and a would-be killer, taking a knife wound that could have been fatal. His bravery that day had earned him a promotion to captain, and the king's lasting gratitude. As word spread through the palace, people began to line up outside the medical wing. The list Marcus had provided was organized in a specific order, though no one could understand the logic behind it. It didn't follow rank or department, and it seemed almost random. The first person on the list was Margaret Thompson, an elderly woman who had been cleaning the palace floors for over 30 years. Margaret was nervous as she approached Marcus's bedside. She had seen him around the palace, of course, but they had never spoken directly. He was always polite when he passed her in the hallways, unlike some of the other guards who acted as if the cleaning staff were invisible. She clutched her cleaning cloth in her weathered hands, unsure of what to expect. Marcus turned his head slowly when she entered, his face pale but his eyes still bright with purpose. "Mrs. Thompson," he said softly, his voice hoarse but warm. "Thank you for coming. Please, sit down." Margaret hesitated before taking the chair that had been placed beside the bed. "Captain Aldrich, sir, I don't understand why you wanted to see me. I'm just a cleaning lady." Marcus smiled weakly. "That's exactly why I wanted to see you first, Mrs. Thompson. Do you remember what you were doing on the morning of March 15th, about 6 months ago?" Margaret looked confused. "March 15th. I died. I clean the floors every day, sir. I don't remember anything special about that particular day. You were cleaning the corridor outside the Queen's chambers," Marcus continued. "There was a young page named Timothy who had dropped a tray of dishes. He was crying because he thought he would be dismissed for his clumsiness." Margaret's eyes widened as the memory came back to her. "Oh yes, poor little Timothy. He was so scared you helped him clean up the mess," Marcus said, his breathing becoming slightly more labored. "But more than that, you told him that everyone makes mistakes, and that his worth wasn't determined by one accident. You gave him a piece of bread from your own lunch because he had missed breakfast that morning." "Well, yes," Margaret said, clearly puzzled. The boy was hungry and upset. It seemed like the right thing to do. Marcus reached out slowly and took her hand. "Mrs. Thompson, that boy Timothy is my nephew. My sister died when he was born, and I've been supporting him and trying to guide him from a distance. He wrote to me about that day, about how a kind woman had shown him compassion when he thought his world was ending. That act of kindness kept him from running away from the palace. He's still here, still working, still learning, because of what you did." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. She had no idea that her simple act had meant so much to anyone. I just did what any decent person would do. That's exactly my point," Marcus said with more strength in his voice than he had shown all morning. "Mrs. Thompson, you have been working in this palace for 30 years. Every single day you have been serving not just the royal family, but everyone who calls this place home. You've been invisible to most people, but your work, your kindness, your dedication has touched more lives than you can imagine." Marcus paused to catch his breath, his grip on her hand tightening slightly. "I have been watching, Mrs. Thompson. For years, I have been watching how people treat each other in this palace. I have seen acts of tremendous kindness that go unnoticed, and I have seen small cruelties that people think don't matter. But everything matters. Every choice we make, every word we speak, every helping hand we extend or withhold. It all matters." Margaret was crying now, overwhelmed by the unexpected recognition of her simple life's work. "Captain, I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything," Marcus replied. "I just needed you to know that your life has mattered. Your kindness has mattered. And when I am gone, I hope you will remember this conversation and continue to be the wonderful person you have always been." As Margaret left the room, wiping her eyes with her apron, word of the conversation began to spread through the palace. People were intrigued and moved by what had transpired. The mysterious soldier wasn't investigating or accusing anyone. He was recognizing and honoring them. Dr. Whitmore watched with growing. The second person on Marcus's list was James Fletcher, a stable hand who had worked with the royal horses for 15 years. James was a quiet man who preferred the company of animals to people, spending his days caring for the magnificent horses that served the royal family and their guests. He approached Marcus's bedside with curiosity mixed with apprehension. Having heard about the emotional encounter with Margaret Thompson, Marcus's condition had visibly deteriorated since the morning. His skin was paler, and speaking seemed to require more effort, but his determination remained unwavering. "Mr. Fletcher," he greeted the stable hand, "thank you for coming. I know you're more comfortable with horses than with people, but I hope you'll bear with me." James shifted uncomfortably in the chair. "Captain, sir, I heard what happened with Mrs. Thompson. The whole palace is talking about it, but I can't imagine what you'd want with someone like me, someone like you," Marcus repeated slowly. "James, do you remember the night of the great storm last winter, the one that damaged part of the east wing?" James nodded. "Terrible night. Wind was howling something fierce, and the rain was coming down in sheets. That night, while everyone else was safely indoors, you were in the stables," Marcus continued. "Not because you had to be, but because you were worried about the horses. You spent the entire night moving from stall to stall, calming them, checking on each one individually." "Well, yes," James said matter-of-factly. "Storms frightened them. They needed someone there." Marcus smiled despite his pain. "But that wasn't all you did that night, was it? Around midnight, you heard something outside the stables." James looked surprised that Marcus knew these details. "There was a dog," he said quietly, "just a stray, soaked to the bone and shivering. I couldn't just leave it out there." "You brought that dog inside, dried it off and shared your dinner with it," Marcus said. "Then you discovered it wasn't alone. It had 3 puppies hidden under some debris behind the stables. You rescued all of them. They would have died otherwise." James replied simply, "Yes, they would have." Marcus agreed. "But here's what you don't know, James. That mother dog belonged to a family in the village whose house had been destroyed in the storm. Their 8-year-old daughter, Emma, had been crying for days, thinking her beloved pet and the puppies were dead. When you took them to the village the next morning and reunited them with that little girl, you didn't just save 4 animals. You restored hope to a family that had lost everything." James's eyes widened. He remembered the little girl's tears of joy, but he had never thought much about it afterward. "I just did what seemed right." Marcus reached for James's weathered hand. "That's exactly who you are, James. You do what's right, even when no one is watching, even when it's difficult or inconvenient. Do you know how rare that is? In a world where people often look the other way, you consistently choose compassion." "But that's just with animals," James protested. "I'm not good with people." "That's where you're wrong," Marcus said with growing intensity despite his weakness. "James, last spring, young Prince Alexander was having trouble with his riding lessons. He was frustrated and embarrassed because he kept falling off his horse. The other instructors were growing impatient with him." James nodded. The prince was getting discouraged. "I could see it in his face." "You approached him after one particularly difficult lesson," Marcus continued. "Instead of lecturing him about technique like everyone else, you told him about your own struggles when you first started working with horses. You shared your failures, your fears, and how you overcame them. You made him feel less alone. He just needed to know it was normal to struggle." James said softly. "Because of your kindness and patience, Prince Alexander didn't give up. He's now one of the finest young riders in the kingdom. And more importantly, he learned something valuable about perseverance and humility. You taught the future king that strength comes not from never failing, but from getting back up after you fall." Tears began to form in James's eyes. I just saw a boy who needed encouragement." Marcus squeezed his hand gently. "James, you have spent your entire career in the shadows, caring for creatures that cannot speak your language but understand your heart. You have shown the same kindness to people, even though you think you're not good with them. You are good with them. You're good with all living things because you have something precious inside you, genuine compassion. As James prepared to leave, overwhelmed by this unexpected recognition, Marcus called out to him once more. James, I need you to do something for me. I need you to remember this conversation, and I need you to start seeing yourself the way others see you. You are not just a stable hand. You are a teacher, a healer, a protector of the vulnerable. Don't hide that light anymore. The third person on the list was Sister Catherine, a nun who served as the palace chaplain and counselor. She had been ministering to the spiritual needs of the royal family and staff for over a decade. Unlike Margaret and James, Sister Catherine was not surprised to be summoned. As someone who regularly counseled the dying, she assumed Marcus wanted to make his final confession or seek spiritual comfort. She entered his room with the serene confidence of someone accustomed to being in the presence of death. Captain Aldrich, she said gently, settling into the chair beside his bed. How can I serve you in your final hours? Marcus looked at her with deep respect. Sister Catherine, I don't need confession or last rites. I need to tell you about a miracle I witnessed. Sister Catherine raised an eyebrow, intrigued by this unexpected beginning. 2 years ago, Marcus began, a young maid named Sarah came to you in despair. She was pregnant, unmarried, and terrified. She had been dismissed from her position and had nowhere to turn. She was contemplating something desperate. Sister Catherine's expression grew serious. She remembered Sarah well, a sweet girl who had made a mistake and was paying a terrible price for it. Sarah told me later about that conversation with you, Marcus continued. She expected judgment, condemnation, rejection. Instead, you held her while she cried. You told her that her worth was not diminished by her mistake, and that her unborn child was a blessing, not a curse. It was the truth, Sister Catherine said simply. But you didn't stop there. Marcus pressed on. You used your own personal savings to help her find lodging. You connected her with a family in the countryside who needed help and were willing to accept her situation. You visited her regularly throughout her pregnancy. And when the baby was born, you were there. Sister Catherine's eyes softened at the memory. Little Michael is a beautiful child. That little boy is now 2 years old, healthy and happy, Marcus said. Sarah has built a new life for herself. She married a good man who loves both her and Michael as his own. But here's what you don't know, Sister Catherine. Sarah's story spread quietly through the village. Other young women in similar situations began seeking you out, knowing they would find compassion rather than condemnation. Marcus paused to catch his breath, then continued with renewed strength. In the past 2 years, you have helped 17 young women in similar circumstances. 17 women who might have made tragic choices instead found hope in new beginnings. Because of your radical compassion, Sister Catherine was stunned. She had indeed helped other young women, but she had never considered the broader impact. By the 4th day, news of Marcus's extraordinary final mission had spread throughout the kingdom. Nobles from distant estates began arriving at the palace, not to pay their respects to the dying soldier, but to witness what many were calling a miraculous outpouring of recognition and love. The palace hallways were filled with people sharing their own encounters with Marcus, comparing stories, and marveling at how this one man had observed so much while remaining virtually invisible to most. The 4th person on Marcus's list was Lord Edmund Blackthorne, a wealthy nobleman who served as the kingdom's treasurer. Lord Blackthorne had a reputation for being stern and uncompromising, particularly when it came to financial matters. Many people feared him, and few considered him capable of genuine warmth or compassion. He approached Marcus's bedside with skepticism, wondering what a common soldier could possibly know about his private affairs. Marcus struggled to sit up slightly as Lord Blackthorne entered. The captain's condition had worsened overnight, and Dr. Whitmore had privately informed the king that Marcus likely had only hours left to live. Yet somehow, he summoned strength whenever someone from his list appeared. Lord Blackthorne, Marcus said with effort, I know you're a busy man, and I appreciate you taking time to see me. Lord Blackthorne settled into the chair with visible discomfort. Captain, I must confess I'm uncertain why I'm on your list. We've barely spoken during your years of service here. Marcus smiled weakly. That's true, my lord, but I've been watching you for years, and I know something about you that might surprise you. The nobleman raised an eyebrow, his expression guarded. 3 years ago, Marcus began, there was a terrible fire in the merchants' quarter of the city. 37 families lost everything, their homes, their businesses, their livelihoods. The official relief fund that was established could only provide basic temporary shelter and food. Lord Blackthorne's expression remained neutral, but Marcus detected a slight shift in his posture. What the public never knew, Marcus continued, was that an anonymous benefactor provided additional funds that allowed those families to rebuild their lives completely. New homes, new businesses, education for their children, medical care for those who were injured. The amount was staggering, nearly 500,000 gold crowns. The kingdom has many wealthy individuals who believe in charity, Lord Blackthorne said carefully. Yes, but this particular benefactor did something unusual. Marcus pressed on. Instead of simply donating money, he secretly investigated each family's specific situation. A widow with 3 children received not just money for a house, but also funding for a small bakery business that would provide ongoing income. An elderly craftsman whose workshop burned received not just money to rebuild, but also a contract guaranteeing steady work for years to come. Lord Blackthorne was now staring at Marcus intently, clearly unsettled by the soldier's detailed knowledge. The benefactor didn't just give money, Lord Blackthorne. He gave dignity. He gave hope. He gave each family exactly what they needed to not just survive, but to thrive. Marcus paused, gathering strength. I know it was you, my lord. The nobleman's carefully maintained composure cracked slightly. I don't know what you're suggesting. Captain, I'm not suggesting anything, Marcus replied gently. I'm stating a fact. For 3 years, I've watched you manage the kingdom's finances with an iron fist during the day, and then spend your evenings secretly arranging for additional help for families in need. The fire victims were not the only ones, were they? Lord Blackthorne was silent for a long moment. Finally, he spoke quietly. How could you possibly know this? Because I've been watching, my lord, not spying, not investigating for any official purpose, but simply observing. I've seen you leave the palace at odd hours, always alone. I've followed you a few times, worried for your safety. I've seen you visiting the poorest parts of the city, not as Lord Blackthorne the treasurer, but dressed as a common citizen. Marcus reached for the nobleman's hand, and surprisingly, Lord Blackthorne didn't pull away. I've seen you pay medical bills for families who couldn't afford treatment. I've seen you quietly fund scholarships for brilliant children whose parents couldn't pay for education. I've seen you ensure that elderly people who worked their entire lives for the crown received dignified retirement, even when the official pension wasn't enough. Tears were now visible in Lord Blackthorne's eyes, though he struggled to maintain his composure. Lord Blackthorne, the people of this kingdom see you as a strict, unforgiving man who cares only about numbers and regulations. But I have seen the truth. I have seen a man who uses his position and his wealth to quietly lift up those who have been forgotten or overlooked. I never wanted recognition, Lord Blackthorne said in a broken voice. I just saw suffering that I had the power to ease. That's exactly why your kindness is so precious, Marcus replied. You don't help others for praise or recognition. You help them because it's right. Because you have been blessed with resources that can make a difference in people's lives. Marcus squeezed the nobleman's hand weakly. Lord Blackthorne, I need you to know that your secret acts of kindness have not gone unnoticed by everyone. I have seen them, and I have seen their impact. That widow with 3 children. Her bakery now employs 6 other people. The elderly craftsman. He has trained dozens of young apprentices, passing on skills that might otherwise have been lost. Your kindness doesn't just help individuals, it strengthens entire communities. Lord Blackthorne was openly weeping now, his usual stern facade completely abandoned. Captain, I don't deserve such praise. I have so much while others have so little. It seems like the least I can do. And that humility, Marcus said with the strongest voice he had managed all day, is exactly why you deserve every word of praise. Lord Blackthorne, you could have lived a life of luxury and comfort, thinking only of your own pleasure. Instead, you have chosen to be a guardian angel for people who don't even know your name. That is nobility in its truest form. As Lord Blackthorne left the room, he was transformed. The stern, feared treasurer was gone, replaced by a man who had been seen and recognized for who he truly was beneath his public persona. The 5th person on the list was Maria Santos, a young kitchen servant who had only been working at the palace for 8 months. She was nervous and confused about why she would be included in Marcus's final wishes. At 19 years old, she felt she had barely had time to make any significant impact on anyone's life. Marcus's breathing had become more labored, and speaking was clearly becoming more difficult. Dr. Whitmore had begun preparing the final medications that would ease his passing, though Marcus insisted on seeing everyone on his list first. Miss Santos, Marcus said softly as she approached his bedside. Thank you for coming. Please don't be nervous. I have something wonderful to tell you. Maria sat down tentatively. Captain, sir, I think there might be a mistake. I haven't done anything special. I just work in the kitchens. Maria, do you remember your 3rd week working here? There was a day when you were assigned to prepare meals for the royal children's tutors. She nodded. Yes, sir. I was so nervous. I'd never cooked for anyone important before that day. You noticed that one of the tutors, Master Reynolds, barely touched his meal. While the other kitchen staff might have assumed he simply didn't like the food, you did something different. You asked him if everything was all right. Maria's eyes widened slightly. He seemed sad. Sir, I just wanted to make sure he was okay. Master Reynolds had just received news that his elderly mother was gravely ill. Marcus continued. He was worried about her, but he also couldn't afford to leave his position to care for her. He was carrying this burden alone, not wanting to trouble anyone with his personal problems. He told me about his mother when I asked, Maria said quietly. My heart went out to him. You didn't just listen to his troubles, Maria. You took action. Without telling anyone, you began preparing special meals for Master Reynolds, foods that would be easy for him to take to his mother, soups and breads that would provide good nutrition for an elderly, sick woman. Maria blushed. I just thought, if my mother were ill, I would want someone to help. But you did more than that, Marcus pressed on. You asked other staff members to help you gather supplies, medicines, warm blankets, even a small amount of money. You organized this effort quietly, without seeking any credit or recognition. Everyone was happy to help once they knew about the situation, Maria said. People are good when they know there's a need. Marcus smiled at her innocence and generosity. Maria, because of your compassion and leadership, Master Reynolds was able to provide excellent care for his mother during her final weeks. She died peacefully, knowing her son was able to be with her because a group of palace staff had come together to support him. Tears began to flow down Maria's cheeks. I'm so glad we could help him. But here's what you don't know, Marcus said, his voice growing stronger with emotion. Master Reynolds was so moved by the kindness he received that he changed his entire approach to life. He had always been a solitary man, focused only on his work and his own concerns. Your compassion opened his heart. Marcus paused to catch his breath. Master Reynolds now organizes similar support efforts whenever anyone at the palace faces personal difficulties. He has created an informal network of care that has helped dozens of people over the past few months. Your kindness started a movement, Maria. Maria was sobbing now, overwhelmed by the unexpected recognition of her simple acts of caring. Maria Santos, you are 19 years old, and you have already changed the culture of this palace. You have shown people that caring for each other isn't just the responsibility of those in authority, it's the responsibility of everyone. You have created a community of compassion that will outlive us all. As the day wore on, more people from Marcus's list came forward, each receiving recognition for acts of kindness, courage, and integrity that had gone unnoticed by everyone except the dying soldier. The palace was transformed as people began to see themselves and each other in a new light, recognizing the extraordinary goodness that had always existed but had never been acknowledged or celebrated. King Edmund himself had begun making quiet inquiries about extending Marcus's final wish into something more permanent, a way to continue recognizing and honoring the hidden acts of goodness that happened every day within his kingdom. As dawn broke on the 5th day, Dr. Whitmore knew that Marcus was living on borrowed time. His pulse was barely detectable, and his breathing had become so shallow that she had to lean close to confirm he was still alive. Yet somehow, he continued to rally whenever someone from his list approached his bedside. It was as if sheer willpower and love were keeping him alive long enough to complete his extraordinary mission. The palace had become a pilgrimage site of sorts. People from the surrounding villages had heard about the dying soldier's final wish and had traveled to witness what many were calling a miracle of recognition and love. The great halls were filled with quiet conversations as people shared stories of kindness they had witnessed or received, inspired by Marcus's example to notice and celebrate the goodness around them. Queen Isabella herself was the 6th person on Marcus's list. This had caused considerable discussion among the palace staff, as it was highly unusual for a common soldier to request a private audience with the Queen, especially under such circumstances. However, Queen Isabella had not hesitated when informed of the request. She had known Marcus by reputation and had always been impressed by his character and service. She entered his room dressed simply, without the elaborate gowns and jewelry that usually marked her royal status. Her presence brought a sense of grace and dignity to the small medical chamber, but there was no pretense or formality in her manner as she took the chair beside Marcus's bed. "Captain Aldrich," she said gently, "I am honored that you requested to see me in your final hours. How may I serve you?" Marcus turned his head slowly toward her, his eyes still bright despite the weakness that was overtaking his body. "Your Majesty," he whispered, "I need to tell you about something you did that changed everything." Queen Isabella looked puzzled. She had interacted with Marcus only briefly over the years, and she couldn't imagine what he might be referring to. 2 years ago, Marcus began, his voice barely audible. There was a ceremony honoring the soldiers who had served with distinction in the Southern campaign. I was among those being recognized for valor in battle. The Queen nodded, remembering the occasion well. During the ceremony, a young page named David accidentally spilled wine on your dress. It was a beautiful white gown with intricate embroidery, and the red wine stain was clearly visible to everyone in the great hall. Queen Isabella's eyes softened as she recalled the incident. "Oh yes, poor David, he was mortified." The entire hall fell silent. Marcus continued. "Everyone expected you to be angry, to have David punished or dismissed. He was just a boy, barely 14, from a poor family. Losing his position would have been devastating. I could see how frightened he was," the Queen said softly. "But you did something that no one expected." Marcus pressed on with growing intensity. "Instead of showing anger or disappointment, you smiled at David. You told him that accidents happen, and that the dress could be cleaned or replaced, but his dignity was irreplaceable." Queen Isabella had not thought much about the incident since it occurred, but she could see from Marcus's expression that it had affected him deeply. "Then you did something even more remarkable," Marcus continued. "You asked David to escort you from the ceremony, making it clear to everyone present that he was not in disgrace, but was being honored with an important responsibility." The Queen remembered walking arm in arm with the trembling boy, trying to help him recover from his embarrassment. "Your Majesty, That moment changed David's life completely, but it also changed something much more important. It changed how everyone in that room understood what true nobility looks like. Marcus paused, gathering what little strength he had left. David later told me that he had been planning to quit his position that very week. He felt inferior to the other pages who came from wealthy families, and he was convinced he didn't belong in the palace. Your kindness in that moment of crisis saved his career and restored his confidence. I'm so glad, Queen Isabella said, genuinely moved. David has grown into such a capable young man. But that's not the end of the story, Marcus continued. Your Majesty, your response to that accident became legendary among the palace staff. People told and retold the story of how their queen had chosen grace over anger, compassion over punishment. Your example inspired countless others to respond to accidents and mistakes with kindness rather than harsh judgment. Marcus reached out slowly, and Queen Isabella took his hand without hesitation. Your Majesty, I have served in your palace for 8 years, and I have watched you every day. You have never once raised your voice in anger at a servant. You have never once treated anyone as beneath your notice. You remember the names of the kitchen staff. You ask about their families. You notice when someone seems troubled or unwell. Tears were beginning to form in the Queen's eyes as she listened to this. Unexpected recognition of her daily choices and behavior. But here's what you may not know, Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger with passion despite his physical weakness. Your consistent kindness and dignity have created a culture of respect throughout this palace. The way you treat people has influenced how everyone else treats each other. Servants take pride in their work because they know their queen values them. Guards show respect to all visitors because they have learned from your example. Queen Isabella was now crying freely, touched by this perspective on her own life and actions. Your Majesty, kings and queens are often remembered for their great victories in war or their magnificent building projects. But I want you to know that you will be remembered for something far greater, for the way you treated people with dignity every single day, regardless of their status or position. Marcus squeezed her hand as tightly as his failing strength would allow. You have been a queen in the truest sense, not because of your crown or your title, but because of your character. You have shown an entire kingdom what leadership looks like when it is based on love rather than power. As Queen Isabella prepared to leave, she was profoundly changed by Marcus's words. She had always tried to be kind and fair, but she had never fully understood the far-reaching impact of her daily choices and interactions. Captain Aldrich, she said before departing, is there anything I can do for you? Any final wish I can fulfill? Marcus smiled peacefully. Your Majesty, my final wish is already being fulfilled. I wanted people to know that their goodness has been seen, that their kindness has mattered, that their lives have made a difference. You have helped make that possible by allowing me to complete this mission. The Queen nodded, deeply moved. Captain, I will ensure that your example lives on. What you have done here will not be forgotten. After Queen Isabella left, word spread quickly that Marcus had completed his list. However, people were surprised to learn that there were still names remaining. The 7th person was Thomas Wright, the head gardener who had tended the palace grounds for over 20 years. Thomas was a quiet man who took great pride in the beauty of the gardens, working tirelessly to ensure that every flower bed, every hedge, and every tree reflected the glory of the kingdom. When Thomas entered Marcus's room, he was struck by how peaceful the captain looked despite his obvious weakness. The room had taken on an almost sacred quality after the remarkable conversations that had taken place there. Mr. Wright, Marcus said softly, thank you for coming. I know you'd rather be tending to your roses than sitting in a sick room. Thomas smiled gently. Captain, after what you've done for everyone else, I'm honored to be here, though I can't imagine what you might want to say to an old gardener. Marcus's eyes sparkled with warmth, despite his exhaustion. Thomas, do you remember the spring when Prince Alexander was 8 years old? He had been struggling with his studies and was feeling frustrated and angry much of the time. The young prince was having a difficult season, Thomas recalled. He seemed so unhappy one day. You found him sitting alone in the garden, crying after a particularly challenging lesson with his tutors. Instead of leaving him to his private moment, you approached him and asked if he would like to help you plant some seeds. Thomas nodded, remembering the encounter well. The boy needed something to do with his hands, something that would help him feel useful. You spent the entire afternoon teaching Prince Alexander about gardening, Marcus continued. But you didn't just teach him about plants and soil. You taught him about patience, about how some of the most beautiful things in life take time to grow. He was a quick learner, Thomas said with pride, that had a natural touch with growing things. Marcus struggled to sit up slightly, wanting to give his full attention to this conversation. Thomas, that afternoon changed Prince Alexander's entire approach to learning. He stopped expecting immediate success and began to understand that growth takes time and patience. Thomas looked surprised. I just thought he enjoyed working in the dirt like most children do. Prince Alexander told me years later that the lesson he learned in your garden was the most important education he ever received. He learned that failing at something doesn't mean you're a failure as a person, it means you're in the process of growing. Marcus paused to catch his breath, then continued. But here's what you don't know, Thomas. Prince Alexander has never forgotten that lesson. Now, when he struggles with new challenges, he remembers what you taught him about patience and persistence. Your wisdom has shaped the character of the future king. Thomas was deeply moved by this revelation. He had always wondered what had become of that afternoon in the garden, but he had never imagined its lasting impact. Thomas, right, Marcus said with renewed strength. You have spent 20 years creating beauty that brings joy to everyone who sees it. But that day with Prince Alexander, you planted something even more valuable than flowers. You planted wisdom and patience in the heart of a young boy who will someday lead this kingdom. As Thomas left the room, he carried with him a profound understanding of how his simple act of kindness had influenced the future of the entire realm. The 8th person on Marcus's list was Dr. Whitmore herself. She had been caring for Marcus throughout his final days, but she had no idea why he would want to speak with her in this formal way. As the royal physician, she was accustomed to being thanked by patients and their families, but something about Marcus's approach suggested this would be different. Dr. Whitmore, Marcus said as she took the chair beside his bed. I know you've been wondering why you're on my list. After all, you're just doing your job by caring for me. She smiled gently. Captain, I must admit I am curious. Our relationship has been professional but limited. Dr. Whitmore, do you remember a night about 18 months ago when you were called to treat a young servant girl who had collapsed in the kitchen? Her name was Anne, and she was barely conscious when you arrived. Dr. Whitmore thought for a moment. Yes, I remember Anne. She was severely malnourished and exhausted. It took several days of careful treatment to get her back on her feet. What you discovered during your examination was that Anne hadn't been eating properly for weeks, Marcus continued. She had been sending most of her wages home to support her sick mother and younger siblings, leaving almost nothing for her own food. The poor child was literally starving herself to help her family, Dr. Whitmore recalled with sadness. But you didn't just treat her immediate medical needs, Marcus pressed on. You spent hours talking with Anne, learning about her situation, understanding the impossible choice she was facing between her own health and her family's survival. Dr. Whitmore nodded. I couldn't just heal her body and send her back to the same situation that had made her ill in the first place. Marcus smiled despite his weakness. Dr. Whitmore, what you did next changed not just Anne's life, but the lives of dozens of other palace employees. You quietly arranged for Anne to receive additional compensation for extra duties that didn't really exist. You made sure she could support her family without sacrificing her own health. It seemed like the compassionate thing to do, Dr. Whitmore said simply. But that wasn't all, Marcus continued. You began paying closer attention to the health and well-being of all the palace staff. You noticed when people seemed stressed or overworked. You started making recommendations about working conditions, rest periods, and nutrition. Dr. Whitmore was beginning to understand where this conversation was leading. The 6th day dawned with a heavy silence throughout the palace. Dr. Whitmore had warned everyone that Marcus was unlikely to survive much longer, yet he continued to cling to life with a determination that defied medical explanation. There were still 3 names remaining on his list, and it seemed as though his will to complete his mission was literally keeping his heart beating. The palace corridors were filled with people who had already met with Marcus, and their faces showed a transformation that was visible to everyone who saw them. They walked differently, spoke differently, and treated each other with a newfound awareness of the goodness that surrounded them. Word had spread far beyond the kingdom's borders, and representatives from neighboring realms had begun arriving to witness what many were calling a miracle of human recognition and love. King Edmund had spent much of the previous evening in deep contemplation. The dying soldier's extraordinary final wish had revealed layers of goodness and kindness within his palace that he had never noticed. As the ruler, he had been focused on grand matters of state, military campaigns, and diplomatic relations. Marcus had shown him that the true strength of his kingdom lay not in its armies or treasures, but in the character of its people. The 9th person on Marcus's list was Captain Robert Sterling, Marcus's immediate superior and closest friend among the palace guard. Robert had been dreading this conversation, knowing that it would likely be their final moment together. The 2 men had served side by side for 6 years, sharing dangers, victories, and the quiet camaraderie that develops between soldiers who trust each other with their lives. Robert entered the room with visible emotion, struggling to maintain his military composure in the face of losing his dearest friend. Marcus looked incredibly frail, his skin pale and his breathing labored, but his eyes still held the warmth and intelligence that Robert had always admired. Robert, Marcus said softly, my friend, thank you for coming, Marcus. Double quotes Robert began but found himself unable to continue. The sight of his strong, capable friend reduced to this fragile state was almost unbearable. Robert, I know this is difficult, Marcus said gently, but I need to tell you something that might surprise you. You think you're here because we're friends, but that's not why you're on my list. Robert looked puzzled, wiping away tears he couldn't contain. Do you remember the night 3 years ago, when we were returning from patrol and found that overturned wagon on the forest road? Marcus asked. Robert nodded. The merchant family that was attacked by bandits. terrible scene. The father was dead, the mother was dying, and there were 3 young children who were terrified and alone. Marcus continued, "We had orders to return to the palace immediately, but you made a decision that night that revealed who you really are." Robert remembered the difficult choice he had faced that evening. "We couldn't just leave those children. You could have sent word back to the palace and continued with our orders," Marcus said. "Instead, you chose to stay with that family. You held the dying mother's hand while she gave you instructions about her children's care. You promised her that they would be safe. It was the right thing to do," Robert said simply. Marcus struggled to sit up slightly, wanting to give this conversation his full attention despite his weakness. "Robert, what you did next was extraordinary. You didn't just make sure those children reached safety. You personally escorted them to their relatives in the distant village of Millbrook. That was a 3-day journey that you made on your own time. They were just children, Marcus. They had lost everything. But you didn't stop there," Marcus continued with growing intensity. "When you discovered that their relatives were poor and couldn't properly care for 3 additional children, you began sending part of your own salary to help support them. For 3 years, Robert, you have been sacrificing your own comfort to ensure that those orphan children have food, clothing, and education." Robert looked uncomfortable with this recognition of his private charity. "I never told anyone about that." "I know you didn't," Marcus said warmly. "That's exactly what makes it so remarkable." "Robert, do you know what became of those children?" Robert shook his head. He had been content to know they were being cared for, without needing updates about their progress. "The eldest boy, Samuel, is now 16 and has become an apprentice blacksmith. Because of the education your support made possible, he's learned to read and write, and he's developing innovations in metalworking that are attracting attention throughout the region." Marcus paused to catch his breath, then continued. "The middle child, Rebecca, is 14 and has shown extraordinary talent in healing arts. The local physician has taken her as an apprentice, and she dreams of becoming a doctor who can help people in rural communities." Robert was amazed to hear about the children's accomplishments. The youngest, little Thomas, is now 11 and has a gift for music that brings joy to everyone in his village. But more importantly, Robert, all 3 of those children have grown up knowing that a stranger cared enough about them to sacrifice for their well-being. They have learned that the world contains people who will help others simply because it's right. Marcus reached for Robert's hand. "My friend, you think of yourself as just a soldier following orders and doing your duty, but I have watched you for years, and I have seen something extraordinary. You have a gift for recognizing when people need help, and you have the courage to act on that recognition, even when it costs you personally." Robert was crying openly now, moved by this unexpected perspective on his own actions. "Robert Sterling, because of your kindness to 3 orphan children, you have helped shape 3 lives that will make the world better. Samuel will create tools that help people work more effectively. Rebecca will heal the sick in communities where medical care is scarce. Thomas will bring beauty and joy through his music." Marcus squeezed his friend's hand with what little strength he had left. "But even more importantly, those 3 children will remember the stranger who helped them, and they will spend their lives helping others in turn. Your kindness has created a legacy of compassion that will continue long after we're both gone." As Robert left the room, he was transformed by the recognition of how his simple acts of decency had created ripples of goodness that extended far beyond anything he had imagined. The final dawn of Marcus's life arrived with an ethereal quality that seemed to transform the entire palace. Word had spread throughout the kingdom and beyond that the dying soldier was about to complete his extraordinary mission. Representatives from distant lands had gathered to witness what many were calling the most profound act of love and recognition in living memory. The palace corridors were filled with people who had been touched by Marcus's final wish, and their faces showed a transformation that seemed to glow with newfound purpose and understanding Dr. Whitmore could barely detect. Marcus's pulse and his breathing had become so faint that she wondered how he was still conscious. Yet when she looked into his eyes, she saw the same clarity and determination that had sustained him throughout this remarkable week. It was as if his soul was refusing to leave until his mission was complete. The last name on Marcus's list had been the subject of intense speculation. Some thought it might be King Edmund himself. Others wondered if it could be someone from Marcus's past that no one at the palace had ever met. But when the final person was summoned to Marcus's bedside, gasps of surprise echoed through the palace halls. It was Timothy, the young page who had dropped the tray of dishes 6 months earlier. The same boy whose story Marcus had shared with Margaret Thompson on the first day of his final mission. Timothy was now 15 years old, still learning his duties and responsibilities, and he was completely bewildered about why he would be the last person on such an important list. Timothy approached Marcus's bedside with nervous reverence. The room had taken on an almost sacred atmosphere after the remarkable conversations that had taken place there over the past week. Flowers sent by well-wishers from across the kingdom filled every available space, their fragrance creating a garden-like setting for this final encounter. "Captain Aldrich, sir," Timothy said softly, his voice trembling with emotion. I don't understand why I'm here. I'm nobody special, just a page who makes mistakes." Marcus turned his head slowly toward the young man, and despite his extreme weakness, his eyes sparkled with warmth and love. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper, but every word carried the weight of profound truth. "Timothy," Marcus said, "you are the most important person on this entire list." The boy looked stunned, unable to comprehend what he was hearing. "Do you remember what I told Mrs. Thompson about the day you dropped the dishes?" Marcus asked. Timothy nodded, his eyes filling with tears. "She told me about your conversation. I couldn't believe that you knew about that day, or that it mattered to anyone." Marcus struggled to sit up slightly, Dr. Whitmore quickly adjusting his pillows to help him. Despite his failing body, he seemed to find strength from some deep well of love and purpose. "Timothy, that day when you dropped the dishes, you thought it was the worst moment of your life. You were embarrassed, scared, and ready to give up on everything you had worked for." "Yes, sir. I thought I would be sent away in disgrace, but something happened in that moment of crisis that revealed the true nature of the people around you," Marcus continued. "Mrs. Thompson showed you kindness when you expected punishment. Other staff members helped you clean up without making you feel worse about your mistake. Even the nobles who witnessed the accident showed understanding rather than anger." Timothy was listening intently, hanging on every word. "Timothy, what you experienced that day was not just individual kindness, it was a glimpse of the true spirit that exists within this palace. But here's what you don't understand yet. Your reaction to that kindness has been just as important as the kindness itself." Marcus paused, gathering what little strength remained in his failing body. "Timothy, I have been watching you for the past 6 months. Ever since that day, you have carried the memory of that kindness with you, and it has changed how you treat other people. When you see someone struggling or making mistakes, you offer help instead of judgment. When you witness accidents or failures, you show compassion instead of criticism." The young man was crying now, overwhelmed by this unexpected recognition. "Just last week," Marcus continued with growing intensity despite his weakness, "you helped a new kitchen maid who was struggling to learn her duties. Instead of laughing at her mistakes like some of the other staff, you patiently showed her the proper techniques. You remembered how it felt to be scared and alone, and you made sure she didn't have to experience that same fear." Timothy wiped his eyes, amazed that Marcus had observed such a small interaction. "Timothy, you are on this list because you represent something precious and rare, the ability to transform pain into compassion. The kindness you received on your worst day has become the kindness you give to others on their worst days." Marcus reached out with tremendous effort, and Timothy immediately grasped his hand. "My young friend, I am dying, and my time in this world is ending, but I have chosen you to be the last person on my list because you represent the future. You are young, you are learning, you are growing, and most importantly, you are carrying forward the legacy of kindness that makes this palace special." Timothy was sobbing freely now, but Marcus continued with renewed strength that seemed to come from his very soul. "Timothy, I need you to make me a promise. I need you to remember this conversation for the rest of your life. I need you to remember that your mistakes do not define you, but your response to kindness does. I need you to continue being the person who helps others when they are struggling, who shows compassion when others show judgment. I promise." "Captain," Timothy managed to say through his tears, "but there's more," Marcus whispered, his voice growing even fainter. "Timothy, I need you to tell this story. I need you to remember all the conversations I've had this week, all the people I've recognized, all the acts of kindness I've celebrated. Someday, when you're older and wiser, I need you to help create a world where people don't wait until someone is dying to recognize the goodness around them." Marcus's breathing became more labored, but he continued with desperate urgency. "Timothy, this palace has been transformed this week because people have seen themselves and each other in a new light. They have recognized that every act of kindness matters, that every person has worth and dignity, that love and compassion are the true measures of a life well lived." The young man squeezed Marcus's hand, understanding the gravity of what he was being asked to do. "I need you to carry this message beyond these palace walls," Marcus continued. "I need you to help create a world where people celebrate each other's goodness while they're alive to hear it, where kindness is recognized and honored, where no act of love goes unnoticed or unappreciated." Timothy nodded through his tears. "I will, Captain. I promise I will." Marcus smiled one final time, his face radiating peace and fulfillment. "Timothy, you came to my bedside thinking you were nobody special, but you are leaving as the guardian of something extraordinary, the knowledge that every person has the power to make the world more beautiful through simple acts of love and kindness." As Timothy prepared to leave, Marcus used the last of his strength to speak once more. "Tell them all," he whispered. "Tell them that love is the only thing that truly matters. Tell them that kindness is never wasted, that compassion is never forgotten, that every good deed creates ripples that extend far beyond what we can see." Timothy stood slowly, transformed by this incredible responsibility and honor. As he reached the door, he turned back one final time to see Marcus lying peacefully, his mission complete, his face serene with the knowledge that he had used his final days to celebrate the goodness in the world rather than mourn his own departure from it. Within minutes of Timothy's departure, Dr. Whitmore confirmed what everyone had expected. Captain Marcus Aldrich had passed away quietly, his extraordinary final wish complete. But his death did not bring sadness to the palace. Instead, it brought a profound sense of gratitude and inspiration that would transform not just the kingdom of Eld, but countless other realms as word of his story spread. In the days that followed, Timothy began sharing the story of Marcus's final week, and the impact was immediate and profound. People throughout the kingdom began recognizing and celebrating the hidden acts of kindness that happened every day around them. The culture of appreciation and recognition that Marcus had sparked in his dying days became a movement that spread across the known world. Years later, when Timothy had grown into a wise and respected leader, he would often tell the story of the dying soldier who had chosen to spend his final breath celebrating the goodness in others. The Palace of Recognition, as it came to be known, it became a pilgrimage site for people seeking to understand the true meaning of love, service, and human dignity. Marcus's final wish had indeed brought the entire palace to tears, but more importantly, it had opened the eyes and hearts of everyone who heard his story. His legacy lived on in every act of kindness recognized, every moment of goodness celebrated, and every life transformed by the simple truth that love is the only thing that truly matters in the end. The 10th person on Marcus's list was Father Benedict, the elderly priest who had served the palace chapel for over 3 decades. Father Benedict had known Marcus since his arrival at the palace 8 years earlier and had always been impressed by the young soldier's character and faith. He approached Marcus's bedside with the quiet dignity of someone who had ministered to many dying people over the years. "My son," Father Benedict said gently as he settled into the chair, "I am honored to be with you in your final hours. How may I serve you?" Marcus looked at the priest with deep affection and respect. "Father Benedict, I don't need last rites or confession. I need to tell you about a miracle you performed." The old priest raised an eyebrow, intrigued by this unexpected beginning. 5 years ago, Marcus began, a young couple came to you seeking to be married. The man was a soldier named William, and the woman was a servant named Grace. They were deeply in love, but there was a problem. Father Benedict nodded slowly, beginning to remember the situation. Grace was from a different faith tradition, Marcus continued. Her family belonged to a religious community that was often viewed with suspicion and sometimes hostility. Many priests would have refused to perform the marriage, and many communities would have rejected the couple. "I remember William and Grace," Father Benedict said softly. "They were genuinely devoted to each other and to their faith." Father Benedict, instead of turning them away or demanding that Grace abandon her beliefs, "You did something remarkable. You took the time to learn about her faith tradition. You studied their customs, their beliefs, their practices." The priest nodded. "Remembering the months of preparation that had preceded the wedding, you created a wedding ceremony that honored both faith traditions." Marcus continued with growing admiration. "You found ways to incorporate Grace's beliefs into the service without compromising your own. You showed both communities that love and faith could bridge differences, rather than create divisions." Father Benedict smiled at the memory. "It was one of the most beautiful weddings I ever performed. Both families were able to celebrate together." Marcus struggled to maintain his focus as his strength continued to ebb. "Father Benedict, that wedding changed everything. Other interfaith couples began coming to you for guidance. Other priests began following your example. You started a movement toward understanding and acceptance that has spread throughout the region." The old priest was moved by this recognition of what had seemed like simple pastoral care. "But here's what you don't know," Marcus continued. "William and Grace's marriage has been extraordinarily happy and strong. Their example has inspired other couples to believe that love can overcome differences. They now have 4 children who are being raised to appreciate both faith traditions and to see diversity as a blessing rather than a threat." Marcus paused, gathering his remaining strength. "Father Benedict, those children are growing up with a deep understanding of tolerance, acceptance, and the beauty of different spiritual paths. They will become leaders who can build bridges between communities that have been divided by fear and misunderstanding." The priest was deeply touched by this revelation of the far-reaching impact of his pastoral decision. "Father Benedict," Marcus concluded, "you could have taken the easy path and refused to perform that marriage. Instead, you chose the difficult path of learning, understanding, and creating unity. Your courage and compassion have helped heal divisions and build bridges that will benefit countless people for generations to come." As Father Benedict prepared to leave, Marcus called out once more, "Father, would you pray with me? Not for my soul, but for all the people who will continue the work of recognizing and celebrating goodness in the world." The old priest knelt beside Marcus's bed, and together they offered a prayer of thanksgiving for the goodness they had witnessed and the love that had been shared during these extraordinary days. As evening approached, there was only one name left on Marcus's list, and everyone in the palace was wondering who it could be. Dr. Whitmore checked his vital signs and marveled that he was still alive. His pulse was barely detectable, and his breathing was so shallow that she had to watch carefully to see the slight rise and fall of his chest. Yet his eyes remained clear and determined, as if he was drawing on some supernatural source of strength to complete his final mission.